Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
Last week we got off on a long, important discussion in some eyes, a tangent in others, about the way to say the Amidah with or without Kedushah, individual versus communal, etc., etc. I'm not going to review that unless someone has a burning question that I have to, because I'd rather talk about this week what I planned to talk about last week, which was the sort of conceptual foundation of this blessing, the third blessing of the Amidah, and what holiness means and what it means when we're saying this bracha. So I really don't mind if there are any questions or comments left over from last time that you felt didn't get addressed. Anything other than, could you please go over the whole thing all over again? That I will not do. Right. Okay. The answer is always ask your local rabbi. All right. So I don't have our Siddur in front of me. Can someone just tell me what page we're on? Tell us what page we're on.
36.
Say again?
36.
36 in one of the Siddurim, right?
In the Slim Shalom.
In the Slim. And in the Sim?
What would that be? That would be 106.
Okay, 36, 106. So this very short blessing, especially compared to the first and second brachot, which were pretty expanded relative to this, okay? So we have Ata Kadosh, you are holy, or you are Kadosh, which we usually translate as holy. Vishimcha Kadosh, your name is holy. Ukdoshim bechol yom yahalalu chasela, and the holy ones every day praise you. And then in some Sephardic Siddurim is added the line, Ki el melech gadol v'kadosh ata, for you are the holy
King,
deity and monarch, deity and sovereign, el melech, great. You are the great, sacred deity and monarch. Baruch atah Hashem, ha'el hakadosh. Blessed are you, God, the kadosh deity. And people will remember that in during the 10 days of penitence between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we changed that blessing to Baruch atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh, right? Rather than the sacred deity, the sacred sovereign, and that is because there are various changes in the 10 days of Tshuva, where we bring in the concept of God's Malchut, or sovereignty. This is not the only one that's changed. Okay? But we're just going to stick with Hayal HaKadosh. So you are holy, your name is holy, the holy ones praise you every day, blessed are you, holy God. So on the one hand, very straightforward. On the other hand, because these are value concepts, they're not straightforward. Let's start from the end. Near the end, Ukdoshim b'chol yom yahalalu chasela, the holy ones every day praise you. Who is that referring to? Who are the holy ones? Terry, you're muted, or you're not muted, but I didn't hear you.
Angels.
The angels. So, and why does that make sense in this context, Terry? Why might we bring up the angels? Because what do we mention in the expanded form of the Kedushah when we are saying it communally and publicly? Terry, go ahead.
I don't know. It's Tva'ot. It's
right. We talk about the angels, and what do the angels do? We say in Kedushah, we're going to praise you just like they do. They say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. They say Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkomo. So we are enacting a version on earth of what in the prophet's prophetic vision the angels are doing on high. So we've mentioned the angels, right? So we say, you are holy, your name is holy, and those holy angels who we just talked about praise you every day. Okay, so that's one possibility. What's the other possibility about who the holy ones are?
Pious people.
Us.
Okay, or humans, us, right? Which we also mentioned in the Kedushah, because in Kedushah we say, Nikadesh et shimcha ba'olam, keshem shemakti shemot v'shmei. We will sanctify your name in the on this plane, just as they sanctify your name up above. The people on the podcast can't see that I'm pointing with my fingers, right? This plane and the up above plane, right? So we're going to praise you. What are we doing in the Kedushah? We are sanctifying your name. Again, we're going to talk about, like, what does that mean to sanctify God's name, right? But we're doing it down below, or here, just as they're doing it in the heavens. So in the Kedushah, we are joining with the angels or imitating the angels. So the Kedoshim could be us, okay? In other words, another possibility is that those who are sanctifying, meaning declaring God to be holy, are themselves holy. So it's either the angels or humans, or, of course, both, right? Meaning that those are not mutually exclusive. And what was the author of that line thinking? The author of that line might have been thinking one, might have been thinking the other, might have been thinking both. Okay. And I'm honestly not entirely sure what the pshat, I can't say it's obvious what the pshat is, the simple, obvious meaning. Did the author clearly mean the angels, or did the author clearly mean Bnei Yisrael sanctifying God's name? Not clear to me. Or did the author clearly mean both? Don't know. Okay. So let's start by talking about Atah Kadosh, you are holy. What does holy mean? I'm asking what seems like an obvious question, but when you say this line, what does that mean? When we say God is holy, by the way, we'll talk about that, but then when we say, what does it mean when we say God's name is holy? That's a different thing too, okay? And why we would refer to either the angels or to us as the holy ones, that's another thing also. So we're going to talk about all those things. So what do we mean when we say God is holy? Not a rhetorical question.
Distinct or separate in some extraordinary special way.
Good. So you said a simple thing and then a bigger thing, right? The simple thing is different, distinct or separate. Okay. I changed it to different, but separate. Not in some, like, I had 6 cherries and I moved 1 cherry and I made it separate, but in some very extraordinary way. Do you want to say any more about the extraordinary way part, Joanna? You don't have to, but
I don't know that I have the words right now.
Okay, got it. Good. Thank you. Other thoughts? When we say God is holy, or something else is holy, or this place is holy, or this experience is holy, or I met a person who I thought was holy. We've all said something like that in our lives, probably all of those things. What did we mean by that?
I think there's an ethical component to that.
Go ahead.
Just when I think of it, it's someone that does right. You have some concept of right and righteousness as part of that.
Okay, which we do attribute to God, correct? As being God. Of very often words that are linked to God are tzedek, righteousness, mishpat, justice or fairness, right? And we talk about we're supposed to do these things, humans are supposed to, because this is one way in which we are supposed to imitate God, right? Okay, good. All right, other thoughts?
There's a human component of it, of requiring somehow to declare something to be holy. Is grape juice or wine inherently holy? No, but it becomes holy and sanctified when I so happen to use it to do something special on Friday night.
Right. So you're raising it, you're making a statement, but I just want to say the statement implies an interesting question, which is, are things intrinsically holy, or are things, whatever holiness means, are things intrinsically holy, or are they holy because we perceive them as holy or label them as holy? It's a complicated question, because I think classical theology would say, well, God is holy, whether or not you think God is holy. That doesn't depend on human declaration. Or maybe not. Or maybe it does. I don't know. Good. Other thoughts? What does it mean to be holy? Have you ever been in a place that you felt was holy? Have you ever met a person who you felt was holy? Have you ever experienced an experience that you felt was holy? And for any of those things, what would have made you use the word holy as opposed to amazing or extraordinary or some other term of uniqueness and appreciation? Letting people contemplate here. The tape didn't get stopped, people listening in podcast land. People are contemplating. I can hear the gears turning. Terry? Yeah?
I don't have a good answer, Avi. I will say that for me, part of the answer is something that connects to awe-inspiring, majorly awe-inspiring.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Goosebump-inducing,
Yeah.
awe-inspiring.
So what kinds of things are awe-inspiring? What makes something awe-inspiring?
And for me, when I've experienced this, part of it has been a realization of my relative insignificance as one human in a very large, amazing world, like being in the Canadian Rockies and thinking that that's definitely God's land.
Uh-huh. Which the psalmist would have written about, no doubt, had David HaMelech lived in the Canadian Rockies. But because he lived where he lived, he wrote about the things that he saw, the birds nesting in the trees and the crashing waters and et cetera, right? Okay, so I can't remember what word you used, insignificance or finitude, right, implies the opposite of that, which is something of much vaster significance, or I'll use another word. I hate to add a hard to understand word just to explain another hard to understand word, but let's say transcendence, which means very, very far or ultimately beyond. Okay. Something beyond my own individual limited experience. Okay. So I'm changing a little bit what you said, but I'm reflecting on what you said. Other thoughts? Hey, Larry, are you listening? I don't know if he's listening. I was going to ask Larry what someone who defines themselves as a relative skeptic would define as holy. But I don't want to put him on the spot there. Meyer, you unmuted.
I was thinking, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was thinking Kadosh is essentially circumscribed in the service of God, one might argue.
Yeah.
And the awe-inspiring, one might be able to define, you say transcendent, we could put it in religious terms and call it godly.
Yes, absolutely. But then I just want to argue with you, because then we're being a little too circular, right? We're saying God is holy, and what I mean by holy is transcendently godly. But we may not be able to escape that trap. Okay. So we've mentioned so far a few aspects, right? Extraordinarily different, moral, transcendent, awe-inspiring. Terry?
One other measure for me, again, as I said before, I grapple with this, and this is not great, but when I come across this feeling, I usually feel humbled and gratitude, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So I want to point out that we're talking about various things that, whether or not we want to say things do or do not have intrinsic holiness, or they're only holy because we experience them as holy. In much of the things that people have said, there is something implied about the person's perception, meaning not necessarily it's holy because we attribute holiness to it, but rather a crucial part of our experience of holiness is that we have an experience of it. Okay, we experience it in a particular way, uniquely different, transcendent, awe-inspiring, supremely moral, right? Most of these things that we're saying do imply that there is a perceiver, right? There is someone on the receiving end of experiencing this holiness, right? So, and again, this is circular. You could say there could be something supremely different, moral, awe-inspiring, and if there was no one there to see it, hear it, or think about it, or experience it, what would that mean? I guess that would mean it might be holy, but we wouldn't experience it as holy, because by definition, we wouldn't be there to experience it. God says to Moses from the bush in the story of Sefer Shemot, right, take your feet off because this is holy ground. So I guess if Moses weren't there, maybe it would still be holy ground. And would that matter to any human if there was no human there to experience it? Right. So the question is holiness there and intrinsic, waiting to be found or discovered or experienced by human beings? Of course, we can only talk about things we experience anyway. We can't talk about things we don't experience, right? Rambam said, if God decided not to create the universe wouldn't exist. None of this would exist, but God would still exist, right? And what would that mean to us? Well, I don't know that would mean anything if we didn't exist, right? Because we wouldn't be around to think about it or perceive it or experience it. So we're talking about our experience of holiness. And so far, no one has said, I think, no one just did the little side shuffle to say sacred. You could have said that, which is just substituting one word for another word. Okay. A little bit like using the word godly. Okay. So we're talking about things or a category of uniquely different, awe-inspiring, moral. There's one other thing that I forgot. And could there be more than one thing in that category? Like, could there be more places in the world that are holy? More places than one, maybe. Could there be more experiences than only one experience in the world that's holy? Maybe. Now, that, of course, implies the question, could there be more things extremely beyond unique and awe-inspiring and godly than one being? So Judaism says no, paganism says yes, right? Right? So the pagans saw holiness, whatever that means, in all sorts of guises, right? Whereas Judaism said, no, those are actually all manifestations of one holiness. The experience of them as being separate is an illusion, right? Thinking that the power and awe-inspiringness between the rain that's behind the rain and the power and awe-inspiringness behind that things grow from the earth may look like they're separate things, but they're actually manifestations of one thing, right? That's captured in the nice midrash we all learned in Hebrew school about Abraham, right? And how he came to monotheism, right? He saw the sun must be the God. Then he saw the sun went down, the moon came up, and it says that, okay, the moon must be the God because it pushed the sun away. Then he saw the stars. Then the sun came up again. He realized there must be something beyond all that. It's a very nice midrashic way that we all learned, right, about how monotheism came to be beyond paganism. Right? So, but I just want to go on record as saying, if you're a pagan, you would say like, well, there could be more, just as there's more one place on earth that's holy, There's not only one place that's holy. There could be more than one deity that's holy, more than one godliness. Okay. Michael Harris?
Yes. I tend to think of holiness in just intellectually, and my thought of it was very similar to Joanna's, meaning separation, God being separate from us on a different plane, something we can't physically be with, that, but only intellectually. So I can't say that I've had any experience that I would consider to be holy, but given Terry's definition, where she included getting goosebumps from, I've had a similar experience. I didn't come away saying, "Oh, this was holy." It just shocked me, and that was I was in Jerusalem visiting my family at Sukkot, and Shacharit one morning. Of course, we were in the sukkah, and we were right up front. And in Jerusalem, maybe all of Israel, I don't know, they duchen every day. So when it came time for duchenin,
Pardon me, which means, I just want to interrupt, which means giving the priestly, Kohanim go up and do the priestly blessing in the repetition of the Amidah, duchenin. Go on.
Okay, so the Kohanim squeezed up front in front of us. In fact, we had to move back a bit to make room for them. And they started the duchenin, and of course the tallis is over the head, the arms are outstretched, and they're going back and forth. And we were at least I was being whipped with the tzitzit. As the one Kohen practically had his arms over my head. And I got this unbelievable feeling. I don't know. It was like electricity shot through me. And I was just stunned by it. And I never did come to a conclusion of what made that happen, why I felt that way, or what that feeling meant. But I had that experience. And
okay.
maybe that was holiness. I don't know.
Thank you. Very interesting. Right. And some of what you say, the question you raise, I want to say, is raises the question of what is someone's conceptual framework and vocabulary, right? So some people would stand in the Canadian Rockies and they would say, "Oh, awe-inspiring nature, it's amazing." And other people might see the same thing and actually have the same subjective experience, and they might say, the universe, it's amazing. And other people might have that same experience, and they would say, it's so godly, right? So one interesting question is, are those just different framings of the same experience, which we have in general in the modern world, become more secularly oriented, right? So we say things like nature, it's just incredible, right? As opposed to, again, you look at some of the Psalms where it's clear that the author said, look at nature. Wow, God is so incredible. Yeah, it's a different kind of conceptual framework. And the question is it actually a different experience, or is it just a different labeling of the same experience? Just want to raise that question. Yeah. People also have this, before Joanna, one more thing. So I want to say, obviously people have this sort of thing around birth, right? Births. Also, lahavdil, around death. Mm-hmm. Okay. These are things that easily take us to places of transcendence, separateness from regular day-to-day experience. Again, transcendence, what does transcendence means? It means, I don't know what it means, but an awareness of things beyond me and beyond regular daily experience and consciousness. I don't know, maybe that's one definition of transcendence. Joanna?
I used to love walking to shul with my youngest son on Shabbat mornings when he was really young. There was something in him about just a Shabbat morning. And our shul was right next to the playground that we might walk to on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And these conversations never happened on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. Uh-huh. But on Shabbat morning, we'd be walking to shul, and he would be apt to say something like, I love the way God made it smell like rain today. So not only was he noticing what was the beautiful flower, or that he used to love that it smelled like rain was a particular favorite. But often things like that, a beautiful flower, or that, spring had just arrived and the trees were in bloom for the first time, or whatever he would notice, that he was noticing it, and that he often put it in the context of God and the divine. And, so I think we set ourselves up. We try to set ourselves up for those holy moments, right? Like that's one of the reasons we separate out Shabbat time, so that we can create time and space for more of an awareness of the holy.
Yes. And it's interesting that he did that as a kid. And then one might reflect and think, okay, and if we raised people educationally a particular kind of way, that framing of it and subjective experience of it might stay with them lifelong. And if when I say we, I don't necessarily mean parents, I mean schooling, right? The world talks about it a different way, then we beat that out of them, right? Because for whatever reasons, right? For whatever reasons that we don't continue to, it's a very interesting question. What is it that nurtures that kind of experience subjectively? So obviously some of it is the child, right? But what are the conditions that allow the child, that encourage the child to express that? And then where does that go? Like, how many bar mitzvah kids talk like that? How many teenagers talk like that? How many adults talk like that? Where did that go? Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing. And where did that go that then adults say, I need to take some class in spiritual something or other because I want to be more spiritual, right? So many of us had that 5-year-old in us, and like, where did that go? What happened to that? Right. It's interesting, by the way, because people talk about material explanations and science, etc. But I want to say it's interesting. David HaMelech, the psalmist, he never lost that. Right.
And just as an interesting PS to your question about, the classes we take as adults, the adults who seek that spirituality and holiness outside of Judaism even, right? So it's one thing, you take the class within Judaism, but then the ones who say, I can't find it here, so I need a little bit of Buddhism in my life, or pick your flavor.
Right. I was once at a shul, and I was talking to someone there, and I was talking about the style of davening there. And how I didn't like the style of davening because it did not give me contemplative time to be thoughtful and experience this sort of thing. That the shul is lovely for the things that it does, but I really miss out on the things that it doesn't do that I thought should. And the person said to me, well, I don't come here for that. I have my yoga class for that. And I thought okay. But why should you have to go to yoga class for that? Okay. Again, the Mishnah, is it the Mishnah, I think, right, who says that the Hasidim Rishonim, the pious men of old, they would contemplate for an hour before they would start the Amidah. They didn't go to yoga class. Right? They brought their contemplative practice into davening. They felt their contemplative practice was part of davening. They didn't separate that out. So yes, good point, Joanna. Michael, were you going to say something?
Yes,
Sorry.
I was going to comment on Joanna's story, and it reminded me of, in terms of children and their comments. For those of you who remember Art Linkletter, he had one of his probably many books was a book of letters from children to God. And one of the letters was from a little girl who said that I didn't know that red and blue and pink and orange went well together until I saw the sunset you made tonight.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Nice. Right. So we say children write letters to God, and that's something that adults stop doing, although maybe in the Amidah you're actually supposed to be doing that. And then we have, certainly within the Jewish tradition, contemplative practices. Like I'm just popping into my, like Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who says you're supposed to go out into the forest and talk to God by yourself. Anyone know what it's called in Hasidus? It's called Hitbodedut. It's a part of Hasidic practice, which is Hitbodedut, which literally in modern Hebrew kind of means to make oneself alone. But it basically means having an experience of being alone away from the madding crowd, as it were, so that you can be one-on-one with God, right? We would call it in contemporary spiritualese a contemplative practice, right? Okay, we're running over. I think I'm going to stop here. What we did, we talked about God. So we might have talked about what it means for something to be holy. Next week, I thought we'd finish up this week, but we didn't, because we allowed some time to be thoughtful. So next week we'll talk about, so what does it mean when we say God is holy, your name is holy, and we are holy, right? How did those all come together in that bracha? Okay, so everyone have a day of experiencing holiness. Be healthy, be well, stay healthy, and God willing, see you all next Tuesday.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.